You can go ahead and turn to chapter 8. We'll get there in a minute. We're going to start today with a little bit of audience interaction. I know y'all love that part. As humans, we love to take the complex ideas of life and boil them down as far as we can. We turn them into simple statements. A lot of times we'll use proverbs to do the job. So for example, instead of talking about how it is wisest to do things right the first time, even if it takes a little bit of extra effort and a little bit of extra time, it's better to do it that way than end up having to do it again and maybe even have to work harder the second time. Instead of saying all that, we just say, a stitch in time saves 9. Keith mentioned, if March comes in like a lion, it's going to go out like a lamb, or vice versa. We're not talking about lions and lambs, we're talking about weather patterns. Or another one along the same lines. Red sky in the morning, sailor take warning. Red sky at night, sailor's delight. So we know all these things, and they're complex ideas boiled down to something very small. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put up a well-known proverb on the screen, first part of it. All you got to do is finish it. Now, then I'm going to show you the answer that some grade schoolers gave to the same question. So number 1, better to be safe. No, better to be safe than punch a 5th grader. Strike while the bug is close. A bird in the hand is a real mess. Big, complicated one. I think, therefore, I get a headache. Beans, no, we're going to skip that one. Early to bed and early to rise. You get to the bathroom first. Don't bite the hand that looks dirty. If you lie down with dogs, that was not quite as known. If you lie down with dogs, you'll wake up with fleas, or you'll stink in the morning. Don't count your chickens, because they need their privacy. Laugh, and the world laughs with you. Cry, and you have to blow your nose. One last one. A rolling stone plays the guitar. You gotta think about that one a little bit. And then one last one. I don't have a kid's response for this one, but it leads right into the sermon for today. Benjamin Franklin is famous for saying, the only things that are certain in this life are death and taxes. Things we love to talk about, right? Death and taxes. But that's where Solomon is going to lead our thoughts today. And he's just gotten through counseling us that we have to improve on how to improve our mature outlook on life and how to live life in a reasonable, balanced fashion. That was chapter 7. And one of the things that he has stressed is the idea that there is enjoyment to be found in life. He's talked about that all through the book so far. Life on this earth might be made up of things that are vanity, they're frustrating, they're transitory, but with the right mindset, you can find enjoyment in the life that God has given you. And several times throughout this scripture, he has told us, find enjoyment in the work that you can do. But what about those things that no one enjoys and that you can't avoid? There are things in life that we cannot get away from and we cannot change. And we can't find any real kind of enjoyment in. In this case, death and taxes. Actually, let's expand that a little bit. You can never get away from death and government. We have to face up to the truth that one day we are going to leave this planet. We're going to leave this life. And even while we're here, we have to live under some kind of governing authority. And quite frankly, much of the time we have to endure living under a government. In Ecclesiastes chapter 8, I want you to keep that open to that passage, because we're going to go through the chapter 8, first part of chapter 9 in little bites, and that means we're going to have to go kind of fast, but keep it open so that you can keep referring back. So we're going to start with the first 9 verses. Solomon says, "Who is like the wise? Who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed. I say, keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. Be not hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he does whatever he pleases. For the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what are you doing? Whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. For there is a time and a way for everything, although man's trouble lies heavy on him. For he does not know what is to be, for who can tell him how it will be? No man has the power to retain the spirit, or power over the day of death. There is no discharge from war, nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. All this I observed while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun, when man had power over man to his hurt." Now remember, whether or not it's actually Solomon writing this book, we do know that the author was a king. He told us that at the very first verse of the book. So when this guy talks about government, either in good ways or bad ways, he's the government. And while we have some not so wonderful words for our present government, I can talk. While we may not have some wonderful words for our present governing system, remember that in biblical times, they weren't living under a democracy. We've got a lot of reasons to praise God for what we have. We'll get to that later. But the king did what the king wanted, and you had no say in it. So it is good for us to thank God for the conditions we live under. But that being said, the principles that the king here advocates are universal. We can apply them to today just as much as they could under a king's rule, especially when we have someone in charge who doesn't believe what we believe, or teach what we teach, or make the laws that we would want him to make. So first things first, he reminds us that this is coming from a place of wisdom. Verse 1, we know that Solomon's wisdom came directly from a divine source, and God provided that wisdom to him. So when he advises us, we ought to pay attention, right? So the first principle that he pulls out for us is pretty simple. Obey your rulers. States it very plainly. Keep the king's command. When the government makes a law, if you want to be wise and you want to be safe, keep that law. And notice there is no caveat here. There is no if. What if the law is unfair? Keep the king's command. What if the lawmaker is ungodly? Keep the king's command. And we'll deal with that more in a minute. What if it's not a good law? Keep the king's command. What if it doesn't make sense? Keep the king's command. Why should we? Well, verse 2 tells us. It tells us because God's oath to him. Keep the king's command because God is backing the king up. When the king speaks and makes a law, when the king commands, it's not just the law that's telling us to keep it. God himself expects us to keep that command as well, with one exception, and we'll talk about that. Even in the New Testament, we get the same command from God through Paul. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority rebels against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. You can't get much more clear than that. The reasoning behind it, though, is sound. Verses 4 and 5 point us to the logical idea that if you keep the king's laws, then you won't be punished for them. Respect the king's authority, remembering that it comes from God, and you will stay unharmed. You will stay safe. Paul goes on in Romans to say the same thing. Rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from the fear of the one in authority? Do what's right, and you'll be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. The wise man, the wise God follower, will recognize that if it's true that God put these people into these places of authority, and it is, Paul says it is, then he did so for a reason. And the biblical reason for government to exist is to protect the righteous and punish the evildoer. He doesn't bear the sword for no reason. And the last time I checked, a sword is not used to tickle. And if God set them there for that purpose, then to defy their rule is the same as defying God. But we say, reasonably, what if that governing authority refuses to play by those rules? What if he treats people wrong? What if he punishes the good and elevates the wicked? What if they're wicked themselves and unfair? Well, read on in Ecclesiastes, starting in verse 10. I saw the wicked buried. They used to go in and out of the holy place and were praised in the city where they'd done such things. This also is vanity. Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. Though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I know that it will be well for those who fear God, because they fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked. Neither will he prolong his days like a shadow, because he does not fear before God. Yes, sometimes we will get evil leaders. And if we get an evil leader, then we live in good company. In fact, Solomon says you should expect a wicked ruler. There have been evil rulers all through history. And that's mostly because when we get a king or a president or a potentate or whatever they want to call themselves, what we also get is a human. And humans mess things up whenever we get the chance. And Solomon tells us that we should anticipate the inevitability of wicked rulers. Solomon himself, though he started off strong, was not a righteous king. He knew firsthand the harm that could come from being that kind of ruler. And the wisdom that he gives us about this is not to rebel or quit paying our taxes. Remember, the first point was obey him anyway. Instead, you let God take care of it his way. God brings his judgment where it's necessary, and he does it on his own time. The wicked ruler should be the one that's afraid of God. Now, does that seem fair? Does it seem right that the positions of power so often go to those who don't even acknowledge that there's a God, let alone pay attention to the ways that he wants them to rule? Surely Solomon and Peter never meant for us to obey the really wicked ones, right? The ones that hate everything God stands for. Well, we already talked about how wicked Solomon became. Started following after other gods, even to the point of building altars to pagan gods that would be used for child sacrifices. We never see Solomon, it never tells us that Solomon participated in those, but we don't know. Paul was writing the book of Romans under the rule of one of the worst Roman Caesars that had ever reigned, Caesar Nero, who was known not long after Romans was written for torturing and killing Christians for his own amusement. And that's the ruler that Paul said, pray for him, submit to him. So this is not an easy teaching. To know, for example, that we're coming up on tax season, and our tax money is going to a government that supports the slaughter of thousands of unborn children. That's just one example we could use. And we could logically say, human logic, and say, well, then I'm not going to pay my taxes. I'm not going to support that. But that's not what Solomon tells us. That's not what Paul tells us. So Solomon makes a point for us that there are going to be wicked rulers. In fact, we should expect them. But we should follow them anyway, leave the judgment up to God. And we should also anticipate the unexpected. Verses 14, 16, and 17. There's a vanity that takes place on earth, that there are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked. There are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I said that this is also vanity. When I applied my heart to know wisdom, to see the business that's done on earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep, then I saw all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. However much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. Sometimes things just don't make sense. Sometimes the good, righteous person gets punished, and the evil one goes free, even prospers. And that doesn't, and it shouldn't, make sense. We cannot always expect to understand why things turn out the ways they do. Think again back to Job. Did Job deserve to have his life turned upside down by Satan? Did he do some kind of wickedness like his so-called friends kept accusing him of? Was it fair? And you know, if you read the book, Job never did get an answer for why all that stuff happened to him. In fact, at the end of his book, when he asked God for an answer, God told him in no uncertain terms, I'm God and you don't get an answer. And that's so often the case with us. So how do we go on when you're under that kind of rule? How do you follow those laws when the person in charge is the one who is wicked? Well, we skip verse 15. I commend joy, for man has no good thing under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful, for this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. Solomon has said several times in this book, do your best to enjoy life. What can you do with the unfairness and the injustice in life? Nothing. You can't change it. You can't fight it. So do what you can to find joy in what you have. Now, thankfully, because of the grace of God, we live in a country that allows us to affect our government. But that doesn't stop the inevitable injustices from happening. So enjoy what you can. Take joy in the labors that you're able to do and in the things that you're able to take joy in. Now, that seems kind of like a fatalistic attitude, doesn't it? Something that I just give up. But it's not really giving up. That's not what Solomon is saying. What Solomon is saying is, if you follow the law, then you're doing God's will. We don't follow the law because we have to. We follow it because God put that person in place. Now, there is one caveat that I want to mention. There is a place for righteous disobedience. But the times for that action are actually very few and far between. In fact, in Scripture, there's really only a very few examples of it. This is when the government attempts to make you break God's law. Not when they give an unlawful law or an ungodly law, but when they're trying to force you to break God's law. That's the time to stand up and say with the apostles, which is right in God's eyes, to listen to you or to him, you be the judges. That being said, Solomon advises us to endure under the government that rules over us. And don't waste time and waste money and waste energy getting worked up over something that is inevitable. We should use what God has given us, our rights as citizens, to enact change. We should do what we can. But, another one of those proverbs, it's better to light a candle than... Nobody knows that one? It's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. As long as there are imperfect men, there will be imperfect governments. It's better to simply obey the laws, do good, trust in God, and enjoy the fruits of your labor. But that's only half of the inevitable truth. There is a certainty of government, but there's also a certainty of death. Look at chapter 9. All this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it's love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. It's the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and to the evil, to the clean and to the unclean, to him who sacrifices and to him who does not sacrifice. And the good one is, or as the good one is, so is the sinner. And he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. This is an evil that in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also, the hearts of children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. But he who is joined with the living has hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Solomon reminds us that death is an inevitability. You can predict with a 100% accuracy rating that everybody is going to die. It's the only 100% certainty in life. In the first 3 verses there, Solomon says, death happens. It happens to the best, most righteous person. It happens to the vilest, evilest scum, and it happens to everyone in between. And it comes as no surprise. It's something we all have to anticipate, and even if we don't, it's going to come anyway. And while we live, we can affect the world around us. We can live freely, make the world a better place, just like we've established. But as we've already established, that in and of itself is vanity. Because once death comes, you don't get a say in what happens next. And eventually, we're lost to history. Now, don't get too worked up over verse 5, that the dead know nothing. Remember, Solomon is speaking in terms of life under the sun. As far as this life goes, the dead can't affect it, can't alter it in any way. And so once that inevitability happens and you go to the grave, your life on this earth is done, and you can't affect anything else that's happening. So if that's true, what do? Verse 7, go eat your bread with joy. Drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you're going. Death is inevitable. So again, enjoy life while you have it. God has blessed you with all kinds of things in this life. Mentions food and drink. I have a feeling that pretty much everybody in this room likes food and drink. Me especially. He mentions the wife you love, the relationships you have. He mentions, let your garments be white. People always, in those times, wore white when they were celebrating. Don't let oil be lacking on your head. That's the same thing as don't go out with a frown on your face. Make sure everybody around you sees you, that you are having a joyful day. Enjoy the things that God has given you. Live with people around you joyfully as much as possible. Enjoy the work that you do, and do it with all your might, because it brings you joy when you succeed. In other words, just because death is inevitable, and maybe because death is inevitable, we ought to live life to the fullest degree that we're capable of. We ought to take the enjoyment that God has provided us with. But we have to remember, just like with the government, we should anticipate the unexpected. Verses 11 and 12. Again, I saw that under the sun, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge. But time and chance happen to them all, for man does not know his time. Like fish that are taken in an evil net, like birds that are caught in a snare, so the children of man are snared at an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them. Death comes for us all, and the thing that we have to anticipate is we don't know when it's going to happen. The healthiest people still have heart attacks. The smartest and the richest can't stave off death's coming. So live like we anticipate the unexpected. And again, that's mentioned in the New Testament many, many times over. Be ready. And Solomon has one last piece of advice for us. Remember the value of wisdom. When all is said and done, when the inevitabilities of life come calling, wisdom is the fallback. It's the thing that we can count on when nothing else will do. Verse 13, I have also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard. The words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Solomon says, I saw an example of how wisdom saved a city. Even though it came from one that society looked down on and couldn't even be bothered to remember, the impact of his wisdom was felt. and mentioned by a king. It was better than strength, better than might, better than the weapons of war. And just like Solomon had said so many times, wisdom is the thing that is to be valued more than anything else. You know, we may not be able to avoid the inevitabilities of life. That's what makes them inevitable. You can't escape death. You can't escape taxes. But we can endure. And we can do so with joy because we've got something that cannot be taken away from us. We know a truth that even Solomon did not have the privilege of knowing. That's the simple fact that we know the one ruler that will never be wicked. We know the one man who conquered death. We know the one who made the inevitable pains of life into the inconsequential. Because really, what is a lifetime lived under a wicked ruler? And what is the pain of the death at the end of that lifetime when you compare it with eternity? We know the one who made those things inconsequential because he defeated death, because he is the one true king. And so the same thing applies to him, just without the negative consequences to them. We can follow his leadership and follow his laws, and we can do so with joy. We can listen to his ways because we know he will bless and save those who are on his side. That's why I picked the song that I picked for our invitation hymn. Back when I was going to Bible camp, actually one of the very first Bible camps I went to as a Christian kid that was already baptized. So it was the first time I'd been to this particular one. There was a game that got played. And all of the students were all gathered together in the big building that we used for devotions. And it was split into three. And it came naturally because there were three sets of chairs. And they got up and they said, well, we're going to play a game. And we're not going to tell you the rules right away. So what we're going to do is, the first thing we're going to do is split you up. So they pointed the ones on one side and said, okay, you guys are going to follow this particular leader. And he left. They all left. I was in the middle, by the way. And they said, you guys on this side, you're going to follow this particular leader. And he left, and they left. And then the one that was left looked at us and said, y'all just stay here. And we started saying, well, what do we do? Just stay here. And we started hearing people outside running around, having fun. And we just sat there. Then every once in a while, one student would run in to where we are. And they'd grab one of us and pull us aside and talk to him real quiet. And then they'd leave and take that student with them. And then from the other side, someone would come in and grab somebody. And I noticed that they were taking these little sticker dots and putting them on. And there was two different colors. I can't remember which, blue and red, I think is what they were. So I started thinking, I think I know what's going on. They're trying to teach us about evangelism. So they've got all these two groups working against each other. So one must be the side of Christ and one must be the side of the world. Okay? So I started looking. And the person would run in, and if they had the blue dot, they'd come in and pull somebody aside and talk to them. And then they'd run out. And if you had the red dot, they just came in and grabbed people. So I thought to myself, okay, if I got to pick a side, I'm going to pick the blue side, because obviously the ones who are talking to the people, they're the ones who are doing the evangelizing. So I set myself in a place so that when the next person came in, I could grab hold of them. They never picked me. So I snuck out. And I found somebody that had a blue dot. I said, give me blue dot. At the end of the game, everybody was called together, one side or another. If you had blue dots, you were on one side. If you had red dots, you were on the other. And anybody that was left in the middle, they all got red dots and were put in with them. And they did this whole thing at the end where they showed that at the end of time, you don't get to be neutral. You have to be one side or the other. I picked the right side, by the way. Think about that. The inevitabilities of life are rulers and death. But if you're on the right side, if you pick the right dot, you don't have to worry about it. I forced my way into it because they didn't pick me. But I still got to be on the right side. This song is called Jesus is Lord of All. If I really believe that, then I can follow him. And even when following him means I have to follow people I don't want to follow. Even when it means that I'm going to have to face the grave at some point. I can do all of that with joy because I know who the real Lord is. So we're going to sing 2 verses of this. And if you need to make a change in your life, this is the time to do it, to make that decision. It's an invitation to come to him. Let's stand and sing.